Hello, welcome to the FME Server Month webinars for all things FME Server. My name is Sam McDonald, and for this webinar, which is our second in our four-part series, we are going to cover self-service with FME Server. Before I get started, I'm going to introduce myself in a little more detail, just for those who may not have attended the previous webinars or who frankly may have forgotten who I am, just to demonstrate that I am more than just a beard with a face attached. I'm an electronic engineer who works for Sales.australia as one of their senior consultants, primarily working on delivering FME-oriented solutions to various clients and groups. If anyone watching this webinar is interested in contacting me with regard to the various FME products or delivering solutions in FME, feel free to contact me via the email you see on the screen. Alternatively, feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. With that out of the way, let's quickly recap what is covered in this series. The FME Server Month webinars consist of 4 webinars in total, covering a series of topics chosen by the technical staff here at OneSpatial. We have already covered an introduction to FME Server, an overall guide to what FME Server offers. Our second topic is self-service, putting the power in your users' hands with easy to set up self-service portals, which will be the topic covered in this webinar. Our third topic is enterprise integration, integrating FME Server with new and existing enterprise integration patterns. Finally, our fourth topic is dynamic engines and scaling, making the most of FME Server's flexibility to cut costs and improve performance. The intention of these webinars is to provide a good insight into the benefits of FME Server and how it can be used to easily deliver on commonly requested features, such as you see in this roadmap. So, it is now a good time to start talking about self-service. I would assume that most people watching this webinar have a good idea of what self-service is. It's literally in the name. It is the ability to serve oneself. Now, fun fact, and I might be playing fast and loose with that phrase, the term self-service actually originated in retail. In 1917, a bloke named Clarence Saunders received a patent from a self-serving store. Rather than compiling a list of goods for a clerk to retrieve, customers in Saunders' store walked around the shop, collected the items that they wanted to buy, and presented them to a cashier before leaving. Obviously, this is fairly standard practice now, but it was a brand new concept at the time, which has dominated the industry due to its popularity with the customers and cost effectiveness for the business. And in more recent times has gone one step further, that we've cut out the cashier altogether and now we have self-service registers for customers to use. Now, these days, the concept of self-service is widespread. In the world of technology and the Internet of Things, it typically refers to offering customers, employees, users, and so on the tools to find the information and data they need when they need. As with Saunders Shop, this offloads the tasks from the staff to the user base, which provides users with convenience and ease of access when they want, if done right. Self-service portals are an increasingly common and requested service from customers. There have been studies and reports provided by Salesforce, Zendesk, Paratura, and so on that typically outline that customers and business loyalty is impacted by self-service availability, and that the majority of consumers expect organizations to offer self-service portals for customer support. In the introduction webinar, I discussed FME Server being the wrapper for FME desktop workflows, offering ease of access to users without individual licensing requirements. The idea of this webinar is that we are going to start really looking at the different options in FME Server to expose those users to the self-service portals. So, to get started with self-service in FME Server, the simplest and most straightforward method is to run a workspace. The Run Workspace option in FME Server is very simple to navigate. Users simply select the workbench that they want to run, fill out their parameters, and click the Run button. Easy. Everything that we're going to look at as part of this webinar fundamentally accomplishes this in one way or another. But the Run Workspace page itself may not be an ideal self-service portal, depending on your needs. The UI for the Run Workspace cannot be modified outside the parameter selections, and user authentication is required to access the Run Workspace page. Luckily, FME Server also offers server apps, which are a means of creating Workspace apps. Basically, this provides a fairly simple and easy to modify web page that runs the Workspace in the backend. The benefits of this are that the Workspace run is presented on a custom URL that can be provided. The front end can be customized to a degree. It allows authenticated and non-authenticated use of the Workspace, so you do not have to log into FME Server or have an account. And it's really easy to work with. Gallery Apps takes this a step further, allowing for front ends that provide a page of links to external sources and Workspace apps, allowing you to basically create easily navigatable portals. Finally, if none of these options are appealing to you, or just aren't diverse enough to scratch that front-end developer itch you might have, FME Server's REST API is well documented and can easily support FME Server as the backend for your custom front ends. So let's start by taking a look at the Run Workspace option. When accessing the Run Workspace option in FME Server, users are presented with a fairly simple UI to navigate, which honestly doesn't change much between Workspace. First option that users need to select, which we've covered last webinar, is just which repository they're going to use. We did the demo repository, part of last week's introduction, so let's just quickly select that. And then we'll be given a list of workspaces now that it knows which repository to look at. We've only got one workspace in here, which is our continent filter workspace, so we're just going to use that one. And as far as service is concerned, we've only got two registered services to this, the job submitter or the data download. I want to be able to download my data directly. I don't want to have to specify an output location, so we're going to go data download. Easy. Next, what you have is the publish parameters, and this is one of the two big talking points, one of the two big things that I'm going to make a point to talk about as part of this Run Workspace portal, is what I'm going to call it. So, publish parameters. These are the parameters that you set when defining the FME desktop workbench. These basically present the users with a means of interacting with the workflow. The majority of the workflow should be uneditable, immutable. It should be able to be changed by the user. But the parameters are what allow the user to define their requirements, their needs. In the case of this, the parameters allow the user to specify what continents that they want in their output shapefile. Any continents that they don't specify, they won't get. It's really simple. And me as the user, I live in Australia, so Oceania. I'm interested in Antarctica, and I like the sea. So let's just do that. The second option is for me to be able to specify the input shapefile to be read. Now, as part of last week, I actually made this available on the shared data resource, so I'm just going to use that again. And it's that simple. As the user just using the Run Workspace, this is my means of editing my requirements, which is important. I need to be able to have this be adjusted to meet my needs. There are other options, which are the advanced options here, which will only be accessible to users if they've actually got permissions to access the advanced options, which we'll get to. And it actually raises my second point around the Run Workspace option, permissions. Users who access this need access to the Run Workspace option, which in all fairness is pretty much the first thing that you give users access to in FME Server. But users also need to actually have the workbenches, the repositories shared with them. You can control groups of users and individual users access to different workbenches, different repositories as required. What this lets you do is this lets you start aggregating access based on use case, and you can modify that as you need. If one person doesn't need access to this continent workbench because they work as one of the janitors, for example, not as a GIS consultant, then they probably don't need access to this. But if you've got a company coffee listing that actually users can just log in and go, yes, please order me a coffee, or access to the cafe menu through FME Server, then probably everyone in the company would like access to that. And you can control that. So that's the second big element to this, is being able to actually control permissions, which we will get to. As far as the advanced, we're just going to leave this alone for now. It specifies what job queues you can assign it to. We don't really care about this. And we're just going to click the run button. And if it's done correctly, we should just get a data download link. Excellent, that's a data download link. I'm interested in the data. I'm going to save the data. Done. Swapping back to the workbench that we did last week, let's take a look at the parameters real quick, because as I mentioned, this is a very important element for the self-service aspect of the Run Workspace. This is basically how users interact with your workspace. And this workspace had 3 parameters. It had a choice for the continents, input location and output location. Very simple. And let's just actually add a few more just to demonstrate. So I'm going to have a parameter group, and I'm just going to call these the real parameters. So these are the ones that we'll keep. And we've seen these before, and we're going to add a second group. These group boxes were added in a relatively recent version of FME, and I absolutely love them. It was a very good choice. I can aggregate my parameters now. Love it. Good job, Safe. So in this fake parameters, let's add a couple of extra ones just to demonstrate some of the parameterization options in FME Server. First one, and I think a really good demonstration of what I'm about to talk about, is the geometry. So the geometry parameter lets you basically define some geometry type. I think typically in GeoJSON, or it's in the FME XML. Basically, let's just stick with GeoJSON, and I'm not going to change this a whole lot. Add another one. Let's add, if we're doing with a geometry, probably a coordinate system is a good idea. And then let's add a color palette choice as well. And let's add, a lot of these are very easy to add, just a date time as well. I'm going to leave these as their standard, as their defaults. But basically, what I'm going to quickly talk about is that parameters may be presented different in FME Server depending on what you're working with. And the geometry is a very good example here. So let's just preview what I've put in. We've got our existing ones that we know, and we've got these new ones. For the select geometry, it's expecting me to actually enter a GeoJSON string, which is not particularly ideal. The coordinate system is pretty good. It has a list of coordinates that I can select from, and more to filter through if I want. I did not want to enter that. Color within FME Desktop, it does present this color palette. And dates gives you a drop down of dates that you can select, which is great. Okay. So I'm okay with this. These are not going to be used for anything, but they're going to be my my example on what you can do with some other parameters in FME Server. So let's just go ahead and publish that. Yes, I do want to override it, and download, and done. Jumping back to the Run Workspace page now, let's take a look at that same workbench again. So demo, continent filter, data download, and we've got a few new parameters that we can play with. So as we just saw, I added the select geometry, select coordinate system, enter a color, and enter a date. Starting with the geometry, because it's what I really want to talk about, is that the geometry parameter doesn't present the same way in FME Desktop as it does in FME Server. It's much nicer in FME Server because it has an embedded map that you can actually use. Basically an embedded OpenStreetMap that you can define a particular draw style that you want to do. And let's say I just wanted to draw a rectangle and go, this is my area of interest. Done. It's worth understanding that some of these parameters do present differently, because FME Desktop is not your intended self-service portal. FME Server is, and in instances like this, FME Server is really tailored for it. It's really important that you actually play around with the parameters and understand what is going to tailor the best user experience. So I've selected my geometry and coordinate system. I've got a drop-down box, and WGS84 GDA is pretty good. And the color, I've got the color palette selector here, which I can either just scroll through colors or actually enter the hex value. But I'm just going to do that and enter a date again. It's got a nice UI to actually just navigate through. So let's say 24th of August, my birthday coming up fairly soon. Again, this won't actually do anything, but if I click run, it's going to be completely relevant and it will run, but it demonstrates some of the UI options in the Run Workspace. So when you're working with Run Workspace, parameters are your friend for tailoring a user experience. Moving over to the user management page now, we can have a look at the second part of what I've said is important for the Run Workspace option, which is permissions. Permissions will allow you to enable or restrict access to individual users or to groups of users based on what you want them to see, basically. You may not want them to even be able to run any workspaces. You may want them to be only run individual workspaces, very specific ones. And that's completely supplemented by FME Server. So looking at our user list here, we've got a few dummy users, and I'm just going to set up the permissions for a few of them. So let's start with Thomas Anderson. And I'm going to give him Run Workspace access and click OK. We're also going to go ahead and check Jack Sparrow, and I'm not going to give him access to anything. I'm going to leave the Run Workspace as blank. So we're going to leave that. And we can show that this has restricted the access for one and not the other. So let's quickly just log out and log in as T. Anderson. Password the chosen one. Log in. And if we have a look, you'll see that Thomas Anderson does have access to Run a Workspace. However, if we try and select repository, he's got no repositories here, and that's because no repositories have been shared with him. He's not the creator of any repositories currently, and no creators have shared their repositories with him. So he has access to Run Workspaces, but he actually hasn't got any workspaces to run. Let's go over to Jack Sparrow. Password Black Girl. And let's take a look. And Jack Sparrow has no access to run the workspaces. So there's no option on the side for him to run any workspaces, which is what we wanted. Which is great. And that makes sense because he can't be trusted. He's a pirate. Let's log back in on the admin account. And the reason we see everything on the admin account is because by default it's a super user account. We have access to everything. And let's navigate back to the users. So this demonstrates that we can actually provide access on an individual user basis to the options of FME Server. But we ran into an issue with Thomas Anderson that was that he didn't have any access to any of the repositories. The way that we can actually fix that is through a couple of means. FME Server gives you a few options to change and update the permissions, the sharing for individual items. The first way is to go directly to the workspaces as well, and this demo repository that we're interested in, you would just go over to the right here and click Share with Others. And all you would need to do is you'd either need to specify a group like we've got here, or specify a user. And you know what we're going to do? We're actually going to specify the Run the Workspace person group, which we generated last week, and we're going to give them access to Run. And we've shared that with that role now. So if we come back to the user management, anyone who's assigned to this Run the Workspace person role will be able to access that. Now, just inspecting the role, the other thing they'll provide access to them is to actually run workspaces, which makes sense. We could also additionally give them access to the repositories themselves. So let's do that. And let's go back to our users. And Thomas Anderson, let's actually now assign him to the security group, Run the Workspace person. And you'll see that the additional permissions that are granted by the role are next to the actual tick boxes. So you've still got the ability to do hybrid stuff while these are being generated. Click OK. The other way that you could do it to update the what is being shared with who is this items here. Items is a really good centralized location to update sharing and access for all your items in FME Service, and not just repositories, but automations, connections, everything. It's typically my go-to. And if I go to repositories, I'll just have a list here and I can actually see what users, what the owner is, what users have access to it, and what roles have access to it. So for that demo, no users individually been granted access, but the role run the workspace person has been granted access. So let's log back over to Thomas Anderson real quick. T. Anderson. Again, he's the chosen one. And now he has access to the workspaces and the run workspace and should be able to access demo. Doesn't have any of the utility repositories because I haven't provided access, but has the ability to now run continent filter on the data download or job submitter service. So this user has restricted access to FME Server, but specifically has access to this portal to request their data. And that's what we're looking for. So let's move on to server apps, where we can start looking at putting more configurable, more custom front ends on our workspaces. When you access server apps in the FME server, you'll be given a few options. You have the option to build workspace apps and manage workspace apps, build gallery apps and manage gallery apps. And it's quite simple. The build is for building and the manage is for managing. Fancy that. Depending on the version of FME server that you're using, you may not see the gallery apps. They're fairly recent, but the workspace apps have been for a few years now. So this version's being used as the most recent released version, which if we scroll down is 2021.101. So workspace apps. We want to build a bit more configurable front end for our workspace, and we're going to use the same workspace we've been using for a while for this initially. So I want to get started. First is the name. This is an internal name, and I'm going to call it Continent Demo. Can't have spaces in this. It must be whole words, only with numbers and hyphens. The title is what's going to be visible to users. I'm going to call this Continent Selector Demo. And I can put a description on it too, which is full markdown. But for now, we're just going to go a front end for Continent Selector. Easy. Now, next you'll have something that's fairly synonymous with what you've already seen with the Run workspace, which is starting to select a repository. We're going to select the demo repository and continent filter again. And we're going to specify the data download service so that users who use this portal just simply need to download their data. An expiration, you can basically set this to actually expire after a certain period of time. It won't be accessible for users anymore. And 10 years, I think I'll be done with this webinar within 10 years, so we'll leave it like that. Require authentication. I'm going to leave this unchecked, just as a proof of concept that you don't actually need users to log in to access this. Then we come down to parameters, and parameters is the parameters that you've seen in Run Workspace. We can actually set the defaults for these, and we can basically say which ones are going to show and which ones are not going to show. For the point of showing this in the web app, even though the 4 lower ones are completely redundant, we're going to show them anyway. And then we come to customize. And this is where you've got a whole heap of options to actually customize the appearance of your web page when it comes to what icons you want for the browser, heading background colors, logos and banners, text on the footer, and logos and such. But we're going to leave this all blank for now just to see what the stock standard look is for these. So we click OK, and we have now got a URL for our Workspace app. Now, let's take a look at this URL we've created. I'm going to copy this address and paste it into the address bar. And what you'll see is actually something that's a bit synonymous with what we've already seen in the Run Workspace, which makes sense. What you have is you have the parameter fields that the users interact with to select what they need to. This is the continent selector that we've been working with, so we know that we need to select the continents that we want to output. We need to specify the shapefiles to be read, and we actually don't have access to the resources the way this has been set up. They're protected. which is fine. I don't want everyday users to be able to basically just come in and access something that I haven't given them permission to access. So what we can do there is that we can actually just upload the data. We've enabled this as an upload service, so we can just say, I need to actually upload the file. There we go. Upload file. Select the geometry. I ambiguously say here because it doesn't matter. Select the coordinate system. Again, WGS84. Color. I like orange. Orange is a good color. And date. My birthday is the 24th of August. There we go. That was very easy. Me as a user have just gone through and selected the parameters that I need. Now, there are a few things that are missing from this compared to the Run Workspace. Things like the repository selection, for example, and this is ideal for this use case. We have specified a location for users to access to fulfill a specific role, which is use the continent selected demo. We don't need them to be going in and saying, oh, this is a repository I want, this is the workbench that I want. We've done that for them. We've set that statically for them to create less noise for them, to create less work for them. It's straight to the point. You access this address, you're fulfilling a specific role. The versatility for the user is how they interact with these parameters, but the workflow that they're accessing is set. Secondly, they don't have access to the advanced parameters, and this is ideal again because they don't need access to them. They don't need to specify the queues, and that we control that from behind the scenes in the back end. All we're looking for here is a very easy to access user experience that is also easy to use. And Server Apps accomplishes that very quickly and very easily. We'll go ahead and click OK. And what you'll see is that this gives you just a slightly modified version of what you saw with the data with the Run Workspace page, where basically it tells you it's running, and then when it's completed, it gives you the thumbs up, it's completed, and a data download URL. Download my data again, and I'm a happy chap. So let's jump back to the management page for the server app that we've just created, and let's actually now start to customize it a little bit. Like I mentioned, the descriptions are markup languages, so you can do a fair bit with it. There's actually even a markdown guide available for your quick cheat sheet if you want. Markdown's very, very easy to forget. I'm just going to put this in bold and the exclamation mark on the end of it, just to make it sound like I'm screaming at people. We're going to now require authentication, so just proof that we can do this, and we're going to allow not a user but a couple of groups that are actually allowed to run this. So the FME admins and super user, and we're actually going to allow the run the workspace person group to run it as well. So if you're part of these groups, you can run this. You will need to log in, but you can run it. Leave parameters as is. We're not going to touch those, but we are going to start to customize this. And you've got a few options for the customization. First is the banner icon. Basically, this is what shows up in the little web element next to the address. And I'll just chuck a icon that I've got there in there. You can just drag and drop pretty much everything. Set as icon, yep. Heading background color, this is at the top of the bar. I'm going to set it as a nice orange again. The heading logo, basically this will be just below that top bar. You could basically put a logo over a banner. So the heading logo and banner and the footer logo and banner are basically the logos overlaid on the banner. So let's just go ahead and do that. I've got a logo here, and I've actually got a free to use banner that looks nice that I've just missed the upload box. There it is. And I'm just going to use the same on the bottom. I can just drag and drop these in. Footer text below the actual fields, I'm just going to another demonstration of the markup. Let's just say, let's put this in bold and go, here is a globe for you, because, and I can actually even view this as we do it. Basically, I can go and insert an image, and I've got this image address set already. It's just a free to use globe icon, and if I just view it, Hey, there's a globe for you, little globe icon. Cool. That's basically all I need. So I'm going to click OK, get the address again, copy it in, and you'll see that this has changed a bit now. Now I've got the nice one spatial logo up the top on a nice banner that someone's designed. This is screaming at people a little more. I probably could have made it bigger to scream at people a bit more. Then I've got my field where users will actually enter their information. And then I'll thoughtfully put a globe here for them just to admire while they fill in their fields. And then the footer, banner, and logo. Very easily customized. And honestly, just puts a bit more of a grace on this page. It's very easy to do. It's very easy to present this field, this page that people can access. Now, one thing that didn't happen here, though, is that I wasn't prompted for a login, and that's because the browser I'm using actually has remembered my credentials. So I need to grab this URL, and I need to open another page, or another browser that doesn't remember who I am. So let's put this in, and you must log in to access the server app continent demo. Okay, so let's log in as Jack Sparrow. Because I believe we said that Jack Sparrow is a pirate and can't be trusted. He's not part of the correct groups. And what we get is that login fail. So I actually entered it wrong, I believe. Black girl. There we go. So I entered it incorrectly the first time and it didn't recognize him. The second time, it's actually said J Sparrow is not authorized to use the FME app continent demo. So basically, it has recognized that J Sparrow is a user but is not part of the correct groups. If we enter T Anderson, who is the chosen one, T Anderson does have access because he's part of the correct groups. So T Anderson's been able to access this and basically now can run this as required. So again, I'll select this and I will then just quickly access the data that I need, which is going to be, I've lost it, sorry, 1 second. Highly prepared, there we go, upload file. Select geometry, whoops. Select geometry, we'll just select this. Color and a date. I actually don't know what Neo's birthday is, so I'm going to enter a random date. I'm going to click OK, and I'm really glad that I've got this globe that I entered to just observe while this is running. It's completed, just as it did previously, and I'm able to download the data. Now that we've finished with the Workspace app, let's have a look at gallery apps. And I'm just going to quickly navigate over to Build Gallery App. Once we get to gallery apps, the form that we need to fill in is fairly similar to the Workspace app. We have a name, which we're going to just call Demo Gallery App. We've got a title, which we're going to call Demo Gallery App, and a description, which I'm going to call Demo Gallery App Original. We have the option to require authentication again and can restrict this to specific users or groups. And if we go to the customization options, you'll see that they're exactly the same as the Workspace app, is that you have options for headings and footers, the footer text and the browser icon. What is different for galleries, however, is this links. And what links allow us to do is that they allow us to embed particular URLs to either external locations or to FME workspaces. And what this in total lets us do is pretty much create a gallery, fancy that, of different locations that we can logically aggregate based on functionality. I could do this to aggregate a series of workbenches I had that generate and validate AutoCAD, for example. So let's add a couple of links, and we'll start with the Workspace app. And we've got continent demo. Label is what appears below it. I'm going to go continent selector. And the tooltip is what you get when you hover over it. And I'm going to put select continents from a shape file. And I will add a logo to this, and we'll just add our globe logo. Done, easy. Add another one, an external URL this time, and I'm going to add the one spatial website. So the label will be one spatial boss, and the tooltip can be all your FME needs in Oz right here. Easy. And I'm going to put our icon on that, just like that. Done. I'm going to reorder it, because you can reorder these. I'm going to put the one spatial website first, and that's all I need. Let's click OK, and it's created. And just like with the Workspace app, we've got a link. So let's access that link. And what we'll have is something very similar to the Workspace app, which is that the default layout is the FME Server bar across the top, the title and the description. And then we have these URLs. You can see the one spatial Oz one with on the top all your FME needs in Australia right here, and our continent selector, select contents from shapefile. If I click on our website, it will take us to our website. If I click on the continent selector, it will redirect us to the Workspace. So fairly simple, fairly synonymous with Workspace apps, layouts and design, but a means of creating a top level to aggregate this sort of stuff based on functionality, based on what's going to make it easier for your users. FME gives you some really easy to use tools to get this done. And with that done, let's move on to the final topic of this webinar, which is how to build a custom front end for FME Server and how to get it work with FME Server. Now, full disclosure, I'm not really going to answer the first part of that, how to build a custom front end, because frankly, I'm not a front end developer and my JavaScript skills are completely lackluster. And who am I to really say how you should build it? I mean, if you're building a custom front end, you're doing it to meet a very specific design requirement that you have, so you should do so. But what I can show is how to get it to work with FME Server, where to go, what to look for, what resources are available to you if you want to get your front end to talk to the back end. And the first thing that you need to know about is the REST API documentation, which is really conveniently located right here in the help section. It comes with the FME installation. All you need to do is click this REST API here, and you're presented with the entire REST API documentation, which is wonderfully helpful. Navigate over to API, and you'll have a full list of everything that you can do with the API. An example here is if I went to health check and went to have a look at what's under health check. Typically, you would use health check with a load balancer. If you've got a distributed deployment, the load balancer health checks every node to make sure they're live. And let's say I wanted to try this out, because I can actually try this out in the browser here. I'll enter my username and password just to allow it to generate a token for me. And the GET request gets a status OK. So that's great. It's very easy to test any part of the API. And if you're going to be building a custom front end, the one that you're probably going to be most likely interested in is transformations. And these options here that allow you to submit a job for transformation asynchronously or synchronously. The distinction between asynchronous and synchronous being how long it takes to return the ID and the content of the job. A asynchronous job submission will actually return the information immediately. It will return the job ID. It can't tell you if it's passed or not, but it's tell you the job ID. So if we run this on the sample, we'll get a response body of ID equals 15. That's the job ID. If we run the synchronous one, we will try it out and we'll have to wait, basically. Here it goes. So, and once it's finished, we actually get a full response body saying that it was ID 16 and that it was a success. Another resource that you should be aware of when looking to create custom front ends is the FME Server Playground. which is basically a resource for developing front ends in JavaScript primarily, but also has some examples around Python, C#, and Java. Now, Safe actually provides a JavaScript library specifically for integrations with FME Server and FME Cloud. And this JavaScript library is heavily documented around how would you go about interacting with the REST API for authorizations, for job submissions like we were just looking at, data visualization around different options such as Google Maps, data delivery, scheduling, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of options here, each of which will actually provide you with the methods from the JavaScript library that you need to use and reference to get this working. Looking at job submissions again, we're talking about running jobs synchronously just before. There's a sample form here that's given to run one of the samples, just like what we saw in my REST API documentation. The only distinction being that this is pointed towards a demo cloud instance. But if I submit the job here, I might actually just select a couple more things just to show that these are interactable, and I'll just keep it as a shapefile. I'm working with shapefiles. Submit the job, and eventually what we'll get is the response. So you get the response. We have examples of how the JavaScript should be laid out. A lot of good information here that should be referenced when trying to develop custom FME Server front ends. And before we wrap up, let's actually have a quick look at a custom front end in FME Server, which is available on the FME Server Playground. So what this is that this is basically a simulated API service that polls for ship information, bus information, and plane information. And what it does is it polls for this information, passes out the JSONs, and then actually sends them via a WebSocket to the front end, which is done in Safe's JavaScript library. And basically, it's just a really good, simple example of real-time data being streamed to a service. This workbench just runs indefinitely and just constantly runs and polls the API and then updates the data. So it's a real-time feed. It's a real-time dashboard, which incorporates a custom front end and an FME server backend. And if you're interested in this or other examples, the FME Server Playground has these demos. This one in particular has the Git repository available to be forked and played with and had a look at. Feel free to get stuck into it. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this webinar. I hope it's been helpful and educational for everyone involved. And if you want to get in contact with me, as mentioned at the start of this presentation, please don't hesitate to reach out on my email address or via LinkedIn. Thank you and have a lovely day.